Well, it looks as though we've got another no-show, so we can add the VC of the University of Leicester to our wall of heroes, which includes most of the free speech folks who have not turned up to our challenge. And once again, we are inviting other guests, and we'll be discussing something else instead. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Vice Chancellor. I know that it seems to be in his interest to not perhaps discuss some of these things, but we will be plowing ahead in his stead. So I'm Eric. You'll recognize me from previous episodes, and we also have joining us the Woke Sorcerer. Hello.
Hello, Eric.
How
are you?
Good,
I'm very well, thank you. Shame to see no-show Nishan.
No-show Nishan, yeah.
I would have thought he'd have some time on his hands, really. You know.
Well,
but
yeah,
there we are.
He seems to be putting golden stickers on the walls at different places, so might be busy commemorating 100 years of excellence or what have you. Or that really impressive video. We'll have to watch that at some point today. That really striking set of slogans that they produced, where it was kind of make it, mix it. It was like Daft Punk song, right?
And Dave Ashby kind of made it into a Spice Girls thing. I don't know if you saw the video.
Yeah,
and it was very fun. Although I think slightly desecrates the legacy of the Spice Girls, really.
It's true. I don't know what Spice Nishan would be.
I'm leaving that open. Vice Chancellor Spice.
Yeah, VC Spice. Yes. So in his stead, we have invited one of the things we've been talking about quite often on our program, which is all about all of the academic free speech sort of crises, most of which are kind of moral panic about, I don't know, people calling someone a TERF, and TERF is a slur or whatever, and that necessitates a kind of massive intervention apparently from the government to stop that from happening. Mm-hmm. Whereas while that's been going on, this really actually genuine major contravention of most standards of academic freedom have been going on at the University of Leicester. Yeah. So we are going to be... What's that?
I just want to say that I would like to see Michelle Donnellan demand that these guests coming on, well, one of them, along with other people made redundant, are employed elsewhere. After she did the same in Sussex, you know.
Yeah, well, and what we will soon find out is that the Barry Weiss stepped forward and answered Michelle Donnellan's call all the way from the United States as well. So
generous. So generous.
Very kind. But shall we bring our guests on, and we'll explain sort of the format. So first we have David Harvie. Hello, David.
Hi, David.
Hi, Eric. Hi, Woke Sorcerer.
Hello, darling.
I think actually Nishan Canagarajah, given his lack of experience, his naivety, I mean, I think somebody said in the Times Higher, a University of Leicester employee, that he was out of his depth. So I would say that his baby spice.
Baby spice. Okay.
Very generous, David. Very generous.
Sure.
Emma Bunton is screaming right now. You do realise that?
Yeah. Yeah, she was a good one. They were all good. And
big love for Spice Girls.
Short? Victoria's.
She's kind of realised that she's better off not singing.
I'm sure she's got plenty to hang with Brooklyn and David.
Put some money to the University of Leicester. That would pay their debts.
Sure. We could have the Spice University of Austin or whatever. And so we'll bring on our other guest, Deborah. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Deborah.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Hello.
Hi, Deborah.
Thank you for joining us. And if I'm not mistaken, Deborah, you're still employed at the University of Leicester. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So I remain in a hostage situation with my employer. I work in the School of History, Politics and International Relations there.
Okay. And David, what is your status at the moment?
I am not employed by the University of Leicester at the moment.
Okay. And so we're going to have to...
At the moment,
yeah. So we're gonna have to. We're also going to be relatively, careful about what we do and don't say in this context. But in general, we're very interested in what is going on at Leicester. But before we get to that, would you mind if we just very quickly run through our 2-week speech? These are the latest news in free speech that we'll cover. We've actually only got 2, so you'll be the third. But we'll start with this. Okay, so the first thing that happened this week that we'll discuss is it actually involves Michelle Donnellan. There was the LSE student protests. Did anyone see this?
Yeah.
Happen. So I'm going to be looking it up, but can you just kind of fill us in on what happened there?
So an Israeli ambassador who has said some really quite problematic things, to say the least, came to do a talk at LSE. Students decided to protest. The Israeli ambassador left in a car, and this is somehow a violent uprising against someone. And as far as I can tell, it's exactly the opposite. It's someone's turned up. That's the one. And the students have said not having it, and she's left, and they've decided she's been hounded out and violently threatened. Students have every right to protest. And also it was also labelled as anti-Semitic by various MPs, which is an anti-Semitic thing in itself, isn't it, to link the Israeli state with all Jewish people. So I don't know who's being anti-Semitic here, but it was called an anti-Semitic attack, which is, problematic to say the least. So that seems to be. But she said some really quite awful things, as I recall.
And as you said earlier, I mean, regardless, the students, I think, were protesting, and it goes to another one of these instances of where student protests are sort of being, they're being framed as this kind of assault on free speech, whereas,
they're actually exercising their free speech.
Instance of free speech. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and students being labelled as thugs and violent thugs, and it's like, are students thugs, or are they complete snowflakes who can't handle debate? I mean, get your mind, make your mind up, really. Schrodinger's student, It's true though, isn't it? The way that these things are framed, and it was the same at Sussex, the way that, setting off a flare was seen as threatening, or wearing a mask during a pandemic. It's a similar thing.
Well, speaking of Sussex, I debated whether we should watch the episode of Lorraine, which was really an excellent. I don't know if you saw Lorraine do the interview with Kathleen Stock, where she was just sort of said, "I'm sorry, but you didn't actually get canceled, did you?" It was just such a wonderful kind of question to ask. And but in the time since we last met, we've also got this new situation, which is that Kathleen Stock has already got a job now at the University of Austin, which is just one of the most bizarre things I've seen in a long time.
University of Austin Powers, more like. I just love that idea,
This is great. So, but in these top schools, can we actually claim to pursue truth? And yet, here they are, just nearly a quarter of academics, and we're looking at Eric Kaufman's report. Is their citation?
What a surprise!
This completely bogus report.
We talking about Eric Kaufman?
Yeah. So they're saying, oh well, the reason we could say that we're not over a third of conservatives won't eat lunch with each other and all the rest.
Eric just invited me for lunch. I'm having lunch with him on Friday.
Shut up.
Well done.
But it's like being rickrolled at this stage of that report, isn't it? It's like, let's click the link. It's Eric Kaufman's report every time.
Well, and of course we've got our elite faculty includes Peter Boghossian, who I don't know. Did you guys see the taxonomy that he produced?
No.
Peter Boghossian. He produced this kind of epic, sort of giant taxonomy of all of the different elements of wokeness and how they're religion. But yeah, so it's kind of fighting the climate. The rituals are recycling, doing trans. You say the secret words that are like trans women are women.
I mean, mental illness. I mean, great. You know, that's something I'm qualified to comment on, really. But I'm sure, you know, it says something like, you know, you take the pills, you take the blue pill or the red pill or whatever in it, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Usual shit.
And also, this is not legible. This is not. You can't read this.
Just as well, actually. Thank you for that. That solved the problem.
The University of Austin at present consists of Peter Boghossian and Kathleen Stock, and I think is it Ian? What's Neil Ferguson's partner?
Ian Hersey Ali, I think her name is.
So they're the only faculty. There she. So that'll be a really wonderful, and they've got no accreditation, no.
Have you seen their headquarters? Have you seen their headquarters in Austin?
Yeah, it's just like a house, isn't it?
It's a house. Like it looks like a house out of some kind of horror. I got to say, it does look a bit like one of those horror film.
Yeah. So that's for anyone thinking of enrolling in the University of Austin, and that is not a real university. I would discourage you from doing that. But you know, by all means, feel free to join the faculty.
I'm sure if David Harvie could is looking for a job, I'm sure he could sign up.
They want
Fancy
dangerous
it,
ideas, which brings us actually to what we're here to discuss: the
I
incredibly
really
dangerous
like
ideas.
I think Pink News kind of summed it up best with their headline: Kathleen Stock helps launch new so-called university with forbidden courses but no actual degrees. I thought that kind of got everything in like a 12-word headline.
It's like forbidden courses, just like an hour of sitting around saying racial slurs to each other or something. Like, is that kind of what forbidden courses are like?
Well, I don't know. You can't tell. You can't know because they're forbidden. Like they've not actually been ever conducted. Because,
for the daughters of the witches, you couldn't burn, isn't it? Really. Another annoyance, especially for myself, given my academic background. There we are.
But thank you all for running through the news with us. But actually, what we really want to discuss this week is this situation at Leicester, which is still ongoing. It's still a kind of ongoing dispute, isn't it? And they're still under boycott. Is that right?
That is correct. University of Leicester is still subject to a global academic boycott.
Wow. So would either David or Deborah, would one of you consider just kind of giving us a brief summary for anyone who's unfamiliar with what's going on?
Sure, I can do that. So January the 18th, which this year also happened to be Blue Monday, that kind of thing where they kind of work out the length of the day and, you know, the unhappiest day of the year. So it was Blue Monday. It was the first day of our new semester at Leicester, or first day of term or something. 145 of us got letters telling us that our jobs were at risk of compulsory redundancy. Of those 145, there were 16 of us in the School of Business, and then people across 4 other academic departments and 3 professional services units. So we can talk about the situation across the university. I think the attack on free speech was most egregious in the School of Business. So in the School of Business, as I said, there were 16 of us threatened, and this was part of a proposal to disinvest from research in critical management studies and political economy. And, you know, going fast forward 6.5 months, and in the School of Business, 9 of us were issued with, you know, were dismissed. And again, across the university, we estimate probably 150 people have left in over that 6 months. A mixture of being made compulsorily redundant, so-called voluntary severance, and people just resigning in disgust. So that's kind of where we are. I guess we can talk more about where it leaves the University of Leicester, global academic boycott, reputation in tatters. You know, in a sense, I think that the future of that university is more in doubt than, you know, our individual futures. But I guess we can come to that. But that's kind of the summary of what happened.
Right. So, Deborah, is there anything you immediately want to add from your experience?
Yeah, I think the only sort of main detail that I would add to that overview is how David mentioned the sort of breach of academic freedom in the manner in which redundancies were targeted in the School of Business. But I think it's important to highlight how connected that was also to trade union victimization through the redundancy process, because in the course of the consultation happening between January and April, colleagues who weren't at risk of redundancy in the School of Business conducted this analysis of the relationship between doing research and critical management studies and or political economy and being placed in the pool of at risk of redundancy, alongside an analysis of public involvement in the local trade union branch and being placed in the category of at risk of redundancy. And their analysis determined that the latter, being an active trade union figure, was much more statistically significant in leading to you being put at risk of redundancy than whatever your research interests were. So I think these two issues are fundamentally linked in what happened, certainly in the School of Business. And both of those issues were a really big factor that led to the introduction of the global academic boycott.
Right. So it's a case of the academic freedom, and we will talk about some of the ways that the kind of metrics and different things were sort of deployed, or the way certain ref returns or what have you, to target your work, and how kind of at a certain point a bit absurd they do become the kind of cases for change and whatnot. But also you're making the point that this had mostly to do with trade union activism, which was not particularly smart if they wanted to kind of get this past the union to not sort of take on the most active members of the union, which is, you know, it's a very substantial branch, but also it's not typically, you wouldn't necessarily find the union officials most often in a business school. Is that right? I mean, Leicester's quite unique in that sense. Is that right, David?
Yeah, I think business schools are kind of quite interesting, actually. Certainly Leicester's business school was unique. I don't think it is anymore, certainly not. But I think business schools certainly in the UK, they're kind of a product of Thatcherism. So, you know, in the 1980s and into the 90s, Thatcher, you know, the cuts to university funding, and particularly, and again, we're seeing this now, particularly to arts, humanities and social sciences. So, you know, sociologists would reinvent themselves as an industrial sociologist, get a job in a business school. Psychologists would reinvent themselves as an industrial psychologist, getting a job in a business school. So kind of business schools kind of sucked up all, you know, people who basically couldn't get jobs in other social science departments. So you kind of have this real, you know, eclectic mix, and not all of them are, you know, head-banging, you know, apologists for capitalism. So actually there are, there are quite a lot of trade unionists in business schools, I think, but more than most in Leicester.
But I suppose one thing I was getting at was Leicester was highly regarded in the field of something like critical management study. It was kind of one of the leading departments in the country, if not the world, for that research, which is obviously something that there's demand for. It's well regarded. Is that am I wrong in thinking that? I just have the sense, even before this happened, that Leicester had a wonderful business school and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, well, before actually, it only became a business school about 5 years ago. So it was originally it was a management centre. It then became a school of management, and only 5 years ago it merged with the economics department, kind of again actually against the wishes of both the management side and the economic side. So it was a forced marriage between those two departments. But yeah, as Martin Parker, who used to work there, was one of the founders, you know, it was the leading school in Europe for critical management studies and critical thought within a business school. I mean, one of my proudest moments actually was, you know, we had this, you know, enormous swelling of support for us, but completely out of the blue. I don't know anybody who knows him, but we had a letter from Kenneth Surin, you know, the critical theorist in the States. He was at the Birmingham University at the same time as Stuart Hall, so kind of was influenced by the Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies at Birmingham, you know, and he wrote and he talked about the reputation of this school, and it's not we didn't have any personal connection, but he'd heard of it, and that was like, that kind of really brought home to me how much of a reputation it had. So Surin wrote to us and he wrote to the Vice Chancellor. Yeah, it really did have a big reputation.
And did this also kind of play itself out in other faculties as well? There were some other faculties that, was it English or medieval history with the Richard of the Third stuff?
It was that in the well, the School of Arts, the cuts were concentrated on two areas of the school. One was medieval and early modern literature, and the other was the teaching of the English language, which also contained a substantial element of medieval studies, because I think we were the only kind of university outside of the Russell Group to still be able to teach kind of Middle English and that kind of medieval focus on both language and literature. And both those elements have now been removed from the curriculum. They did decide to retain a small amount of early modern studies in the school. And also then in was it maths and informatics? So the cuts there were targeted on stripping out pure maths from the curriculum and research. So the kind of in an intellectual sense, the rationales for these decisions showed such disregard for the disciplines, that, you know, the discipline's integrity. So the idea that you can just remove pure maths from the equation and it still be viable as a subject, the idea that you can retain a tiny bit of early modern literature and still claim to be teaching a broad chronological sweep of English. So yeah, serious flaws in terms of the you know, the legacies that those decisions will have for the disciplines, as well as, of course, the people who suffered through the process.
Right.
Can I come in on the medieval stuff? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure,
Just because that's my field. So what made me laugh in a way, although hollowly, was when Nishan Canagarajah said they had no intention of cancelling Chaucer. And I think that was the point where they realised they then had to keep one person on, because Chaucer is in fact medieval, right? So I think there is someone who's kind of teaching late medieval and early modern, so they can still kind of do Chaucer. So just goes to show as well how little these people know about what they're attacking.
They were slashing.
The second thing is that he waded into a massive cowpat that's been a very public discussion about the state of medieval studies in the last 2 or 3 years, about important decolonisation and anti-racist work that we have to do. So he said something about how removing medieval studies would decolonise helped to decolonize their department. And unfortunately, what he didn't realize was that he waded into something. He hadn't a clue what he was wading into. So that's two things that I think illustrate the lack of understanding about my field. Certainly, I can't talk for maths. I can't talk for management studies. But also the other point I wanted to just make quickly was the terrible, like how they kept stepping in like ridiculously massive dog shits in terms of marketing. Like they kept going on about locusts and Richard III and promoting all these MOOCs. And it's like, you do realise that you're sacking all of these stuff. And it was just relentless. Like, who are these people? Is this trolling? Or is it absolute incompetence? Because it was, let's say Ronald Hart had a field day, didn't he? Let's face it. Trolling those accounts. So I just wanted to kind of give some of the medieval context because I obviously have been involved in these discussions.
Yeah. Well, and I think, because the question that Deborah raised about the fields of study, then it's damaging to the individuals, of course, but it's actually really messing up the field of mathematics, or at least at Leicester, the way that is taught, which has not just been, and I know Leicester has been around for 100 years or whatever, and that program will have developed across that time for various reasons. In the same way, critical management studies, there was an era where folks, I have the sense Martin Parker was involved in really building that up to have that reputation. And the folks that are just sort of slashing these don't seem to have any idea of what they're, like, who put these people in charge that they could do that. That's kind of, I think, one of the questions. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on who put these folks in charge?
It wasn't just Martin Parker, actually. I mean, critical management studies is a bit of an odd thing, and we could talk at length about what it actually involves. I mean, very few of us would actually subscribe to being critical management studies scholars, but Gibson Burrell is widely regarded to be one of the founders of this, and it was him who essentially created the department. He was invited to head up the then management center, I think in 2003, and he brought a load of people in with him, like Martin Parker, like Simon Lilly, like Joe Brewis, like Jeff Lightfoot, like Valerie Fournier. And, Gibson Burrell was one of the people who's been sacked. Valerie Fournier is one of the people who's been sacked. Simon Lilly, Jeff Lightfoot, they've all been sacked. These are the people who created this department, the people who built up its reputation. And they've all gone. In terms of,
you can't reproduce that. You can't bring that back. And now a lot of people have left. In addition to the people they were getting rid of, a lot of people seem to have left out of frustration and insecurity, I would imagine, as well.
Probably 20 to 25 people have left the School of Business in the past 8 months. Yeah. And many more will be looking for jobs.
Yeah,
there was a really oh, sorry, Deborah, you go.
I was just going to add to that it has left, the whole process has left kind of a legacy across the university, I think, in terms of collapse in staff morale, which was already not great. And I think probably quite a lot of people in all parts of the university are looking for ways out of the institution. And partly, there's been specific aspects of the process which the university refers to as shaping for excellence, that I think have that. And the way in which just arbitrarily deciding that we're going to disinvest in this particular type of research, or not even a kind of subject of research, but a way of doing it. So an approach to a particular research subject, that can suddenly just be decided by people who don't understand the fields that they're dissecting. So that creates a sense of, well, they might do that to me next time. And then also there has been, Joe, you mentioned the repeated own goals on social media, for which they did receive, voluminous criticism. But in return, they did internally start fighting back against that process by aggressive probably shouldn't use the word aggressive. I'll wheel back and unsay that word aggressive, but sustained, shall I say, monitoring of staff's social media activities. And that, that creates an atmosphere of distrust as well, which doesn't help matters in terms of staff morale and contentment.
Well, if you treat your staff well, they won't go on social media, will they? I think that's, it's like if you have a good trade union branch, that will help you in the long run, because you've got staff who are being helped and kind of provided for and all of that kind of thing. But there was a really striking photo, wasn't there, David, that Chris Grocott took, I think, of everybody on a sort of picket line and kind of marking out everybody who was kind of down to be made redundant and their position on the branch.
Yeah. And
it was really quite striking. There was like yourself and others who maybe we can't mention because they've signed NDAs or whatever, I don't know. But it's, it was striking to see that this was really an attack. And it was attack on not only on people's jobs, but also on important branch caseworkers who were fighting for their own jobs and for the jobs of other people. And that's enough to make anyone crumble, isn't it? The pressure must have been absolutely, unbearable. I mean, when you're trying to do that, but also defend your own jobs, it's, yeah. I
mean, I can give you some figures if we want to avoid naming specific individuals. So of the original pool of 145 staff being put at risk of redundancy, the proportion of trade union officers and representatives at risk was 8.4% of the total pool. And you compare that to a figure of staff not at risk of redundancy, trade union officers and representatives accounted for 1.7% of that pool. So this is a negative disproportionate impact of 6.7%. Now, the university's own policies stipulate that any such negative disproportionate impact over 5% must be mitigated against. Leicester UCE demanded a full investigation into how this state of affairs had arisen, which was decided by the director of HR as unnecessary. Fast forward to the point where 26 members of staff at the end received their outcomes of being made compulsorily redundant. 27% of those were Leicester UCE officers and representatives.
Of the ones
the
that
figures,
were actually...
because in the meantime, people had
sure.
Agreed.
And would they say... But that's because critical management studies people, that was one of the places we're disinvesting from. They tend to be sort of active in the trade union movement. That's just an unfortunate, side effect of...
or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think they even justified it in that way at all. I don't think they ever responded to these concerns. But I mean, those statistics don't lie. And it wasn't just trade union officers and representatives in the School of Business. This was across the board.
Right.
I think it's really, in a sense, it is quite hard to see the rationale or the logic for what they did. But I mean, you asked who was involved, Erica, earlier on, and I think there's a few things. One, we have no doubt that this was an attack on trade union organisation. So, we had, you mentioned us being a militant branch, and yes, we were. We fought off mass redundancies in 2016 with some success. In 2018, again, we fought off 200 plus mass redundancies, and there was not a single compulsory redundancy in 2018. People did people did leave, but there was nobody made compulsorily redundant. Obviously,
it's really hard to say that.
It's really hard, yeah. Obviously, there've been the national disputes, and at the end of the 2018 dispute, Edmund Burke, Deputy Vice Chancellor, said to our officers at the end of one of the negotiating meetings, "I won't forget this." Okay, we have a chair of council, Gary Dixon, who has boasted of having unique entrepreneurial experience. Okay, Gary Dixon, you should know the name Gary Dixon, because Gary Dixon is one of the trustees of USS. So Gary Dixon is am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, it's free speech, eh?
Okay, yeah, fine. Gary Dixon is one of the fuckers who are stealing pensions. Okay,
Right.
and he is also one of the chair of council of University of Leicester. So there's kind of a, it really was an attempt to destroy organised, the union organisation. And in 2019, when we were on strike in 2019, Nishan Canagarajah, the vice chancellor, he kind of stopped to chat to people on his way to work at the picket line, and he described Leicester UCU as the most intimidating and most disruptive branch in the sector. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that's true, but there was this perception that it was a militant branch and it had to be destroyed, and that's basically what they set out to do.
And also, but I mean, your branch is from the outside, and not having visited it, but it's militant in the sense of having geese, and it's drums, and it's like it's militant in that like you're a very lively and convivial branch, I would say, and not militant in the sense of like being antagonistic for its own sake, but you support your whole community as a community. Is that right? I assume you've also gotten that from researching social movements and researching how strikes work, and like you're actually good at this.
I think so, but I don't want to shy away from the the militant and antagonism sort of labels. I think that the present state of higher education in the United Kingdom at the moment is that if you are interested in scholarship, if you're interested in care for yourself, for your colleagues, for your students, if you're interested in all of those things, if you're interested in that sort of vision of education, then you have no choice but to be antagonistic to vice chancellors and their minions, because
well, and because we did invite
different visions.
Because we did invite Nishan Canagarajah, but he's only recently joined, and my sense is that the university has had a much more sustained financial crisis that was also not created by you, that was created by bad building decisions. And so, am I wrong about that?
You're right about that, yeah.
So they've kind of put him, he's like the fall guy in a certain way, isn't he?
He could be, yeah. I mean, one of the things that we've done some investigation into the governance and the finances in about, there's been since about 2015, there's been a systematic hollowing out of the governance. So one of the governing bodies is called Court, and that's kind of the local great and the good, and professors emeritus. And in 2015 or 2016, all of the professors emeritus members were told that they would henceforth be associate members of Court, basically a purely, honorary title.
Sure.
So have no say in the running of university. Something similar happened to the academic governing body, Senate. Ordinary members of staff who had some representation were basically expelled from that body. Council, the supreme governing body, decided to increase the university's risk appetite around this same time, and from that period, over the past 5 years, the university's long-term debt has tripled, including using sort of so-called clever financial engineering.
Yeah.
So
you would think that maybe if they asked the business school, what should we do, they might not lose 3 times.
I think there's something to be said, because I think sort of firstly, as a fixed term, I'm still fixed term, still ECR. If I get involved in my branch, like there's not much to lose because I'm externally funded, right? But I think what's happened at Leicester might make a lot of people wanting to get involved in their trade union nervous, because they've seen what's happened, and I think that's really scary. And it's not just people at Leicester; people all over the place might look at that and say, I'm too scared, I'm too worried about losing my job or about being targeted, I'm going to step back, I'm not going to get involved, yeah? So that really worries me. The other thing is that, as Eric just sort of kind of touched on there, critical management studies may be kind of critical of capitalism, but I would have thought that this is all very important stuff that anybody wanting to start a business needs to think about. critical management studies, political economy. It's still, unfortunately, something that is actually extremely necessary for people going down that kind of route. And obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not just a kind of academic critique. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And the most ironic, I think, part of this is that these redundancies were conducted in the name of a new university strategy that hadn't been completed. Now, in the last month or so, details of that strategy have started to emerge. And one of the 5 major areas of research strength that the university claims commitment to is around social justice. Now, if you were doing anything, about how to build social justice into business a couple of months ago, that would get you fired. So it seems to be that the research strategy wants research that promotes social justice, but just not in the world of business.
Yeah, and it's like social justice, but not that kind. Not the kind that actually reflects back on injustices at university. And
Not the kind that would actually make any difference to the world. Not the kind this is a really, really important point. You can criticize other people, but provided, or other organizations, but provided that you don't criticize your employer, you don't criticize any organization that might be associated with your employer or fund your employer. And
what, like boohoo.com, isn't it, in Leicester?
Well,
or is it another one that have a sweatshop? Are they linked to the university? Maybe we can't even talk about it, but
I do believe there was some talk of them giving some money to the university, and I don't think the university accepted it in the end.
I
don't think they were sure.
But still, it was on the table, right? And these people run sweatshops in Leicester. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think if we look at the people who are employed at Leicester, and there are people who do good critical research, and I'm not going to name names here, but there are people who do critical research, but because they don't attack their employer, because they stayed silent throughout this dispute,
right?
They have kind of they're clean. They've got away with it.
Right.
And I think that's the really, really important lesson here.
Yeah.
Or one of
and because your group that was targeted in the business school, not least because you were able to kind of deconstruct some of the language that was coming from management about change and all the rest of it, and what was really meant by some of these. So you sort of took on the management directly and said, that's absurd, or how can you be doing this and saying that? And whereas, as you say, to criticize, some entity way out there that's doing something wrong, that might be politically au fait, but it doesn't actually. It's not actually the University of Dangerous Ideas at that point. And actually the irony is to be a citizen of change means to engage with your own house, right? Get your own house in order, and to say, we want this to be a university of care and all these other things, and which actually might be an opportunity for me to kind of shift over to a few things. One is how this was an academic freedom issue, because I feel like some folks would be fearful, as Joe said, about the targeting of union status and so forth. But I can also imagine some academics who think, well, I don't like UCU anyway, and it's not my problem. But as an academic freedom issue, David, you explicitly made the case that this was a violation of your academic freedom and the university's own policies on that. Is that right? You might be muted.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are two kind of two parts to this. One is, yes, we were ultimately dismissed because it was they said that we were primarily conducting research in critical management studies and or political economy. Now they provided, after they put us at risk, they provided some definitions of critical management studies. And critical management studies, they this was the shoddy scholarship of it. They took their definition from a 5-page handbook entry that was written maybe 15 years ago, and they defined critical management studies as basically taking a skeptical position towards business and management practices and to capitalism. And political economy was only defined in terms of critical management studies. And this is one of the interesting things: the rational choice tradition of political economy, think Milton Friedman, for example, was explicitly excluded from the definition of political economy. Now that's really interesting, because some of the Friedrich Hayek, for example, called himself a political economist. Milton Friedman, there's no Adam Smith, political economist. But the reason for defining it this way was to include people like me, but not to include people in the economics, finance and accounting division or department of the school. So it's almost like, they chose the people they wanted to get rid of. And get rid of the dean of the business school, James Devlin. He used this expression in a meeting to so-called non-impacted staff. He talked about people being got rid of at Manchester a few years ago. So they chose the people they wanted to get rid of, and then they kind of drew a wiggly line around these people. I think that's how they did it.
Right.
In terms of
now, sorry, go ahead.
And just in terms of the academic freedom, we put in formal complaints to the universities, and again, it was really hard to find out actually who we wrote to about this, but we complained that our academic freedom had been breached. The panel which heard our case was convened and chaired by the Deputy Vice Chancellor, who of course, as Deputy Vice Chancellor, was organizing the redundancies. So he convened a 3-person panel, including himself, and they found that our academic freedom had not been breached. And interestingly, according to the university's ordinances on academic freedom, academics have the right to, question, test ideas and so on, subject to the rights of the university to manage the organisation efficiently and economically. So at the University of Leicester, academic freedom is subordinate to the rights of the bosses to manage their organisation efficiently and economically. So there's no academic freedom at University of Leicester.
Yes, and you've sent me a few documents to review and mentioned that these might... I've got a letter here, outcome of academic freedom request. I don't know if you'd feel comfortable...
Yeah, that sort of on screen, sure.
Yeah, okay. So here we've got... So this is outcome of the academic... So there's the 3-member panel and HR... sort of reviewing your case, which from what I recall is quite a substantial, academic argument for why this is a violation of academic freedom. But it does say, it says the university maintains the right of staff to exercise, provided the university can manage itself efficiently and economically. That's kind of what they went with, was basically, we feel like selling a different product.
I think that's, yeah.
So they basically said the fact that you've been doing research in this area, have been recognized, and have, for example, accredited classes moderated by external, course assessors. None of that matters if they feel like they don't want to sell your product anymore.
That would seem right, yeah.
And I feel like that issue is something that, regardless of trade union membership, we should all sort of be... Should we be terrified at this as a precedent? That these people who have demonstrated they're essentially not interested in the academics of merit of the cases they're making.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. Michelle Donnellan.
Hello, Michelle.
Yeah, can I call you? I'm sorry, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back? Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, bye.
Was that Michelle?
That was Michelle. She's been so helpful. She's been yeah, I think
Brilliant.
She's been putting the word out with vice chancellors trying to get me a job. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, no, that's good. Well, that's good. That's good to hear because she has been saying that academic freedom is under threat.
Yeah.
And
much maligned. Actually, much maligned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
And and everyone should be free to say whatever they want. Yeah. Unless it's critical management studies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right to stress, Eric, that this is a really dangerous precedent has been set in terms of using this as a reason to get rid of people, because if it's also maybe worth emphasizing that at no point either throughout the entire process was any evidence presented to support the idea that getting rid of critical management studies would actually help make the university more economic or efficient. And
it seems like it was justified after the fact as well. Like the post hoc kind of, we've already targeted these people, so now we have to explain why. So we're going to go back in time and say it was because we wanted to get rid of management studies, critical management.
Yes, there were a lot of post hoc rationalizations of various things. Also some predictions of the future as well, as I recall. In some cases, people were assessed at falling within the category of doing critical management studies based on what they might do in future, rather than stuff they had actually published.
Wow.
So
maybe they had that Tom Cruise Minority Report thing, like with the.
So what, all those people in medieval English that might stray into critical management studies, yeah? Or all those people working on locusts.
And the horror of them actually accidentally doing it.
Well, we have had some discussions through the consultation process as to, well, what happens to people who remain behind if they suddenly decide they want to, publish a journal article in, what was one of the ones you got targeted for? Critical perspectives on accounting. Yeah, so what happens if I suddenly decided, well, I'm not in the business school, but if someone in the business school decided to submit a journal article to critical perspectives on accounting, what mechanisms would prevent them from doing that? Would they be prevented from doing that? And what consequences for them would there be if they went ahead and did it anyway against advice? And there were, not very many clear answers to those types of questions. So,
and also, that wasn't in your contract that you couldn't publish in that journal. I find it really horrific that you'd be encouraged to publish, and then it's kind of like, oh, well, you published in this banned journal. I mean, it's like, and after the fact as well. So the moving through the future is one thing, but also going back and saying, well, you should have known better than to publish in this critical perspectives on accounting.
But also what gets me is that we're all supposed to be critical as humanity scholars, as social scientists, as academics. Critical is kind of what we're trained to do. So where does this end? Am I a critical medievalist because I don't take, I don't know, something at face value because it's written in a certain form? Or where the fuck does this end? Just people sitting around singing Kumbaya uncritically or something. I don't know. It's just goes against the whole grain of what it is to be an academic to me anyway. And that can be whatever discipline you're in.
I think it's all a bit confused. So yeah, it totally goes against that. So one of the key managers here is Professor Henrietta O'Connor, who's the head of the College of Social Science, Arts and Humanities. And she and one of her long-standing research collaborator, John Goodwin, a few years ago, they wrote a book chapter in which they talk about how much can be learned from critical management studies. Then, fast forward a few years, and she's overseeing this case against critical management studies. None of this makes a lot of sense. One of the supposedly non-impacted members of staff asked, in a meeting, what if I want to publishing critical perspectives on accounting because it's one of the few, it's a top accounting journal. And the dean said, were you put at risk? And he said, no. So just carry on doing what you're doing. So it really suggests that this was, either a completely arbitrary attack or an attack, as we've said, on people who were trade union organizers and otherwise critical of management. Yeah.
Right. Well, and so I suppose because we're getting on in time, but from this experience, what might be some lessons to kind of take forward, perhaps to other institutions or at Leicester itself? Like what could have been in place? Because it strikes me as the way that these folks who are steering this campaign are also on the appeals commissions, just like these types of things. Like, let's imagine that, well, you could talk to Michelle Donnellan when she calls back later, and you could say, this is what I think the government should not be allowing these kind of, how could you have an appeals with the same people who created the redundancy? I mean, these things sound like they are just basic, you don't even need a degree. That's just like natural justice. You wouldn't have that, but yet there you are.
That's a very good question, Eric. I'm not certain of the answer. I mean, we could talk for another, hours about this. I think one of the things we learned is that there is no higher authority that we can appeal to here. We know that the government doesn't care about free speech unless, unless you're a transphobe or, what we know about Michelle Donnellan, who said that Holocaust deniers, should be platformed. That's not the government view, but that's kind of where we're headed. We tried appealing to the Office for Students, not just us in the School of Business, but across the university there were similar egregious things happening. Office for Students not interested in this stuff.
Right.
So in a sense, it's very clarifying. We are on our own. If we're going to kind of stop this happening to universities and kind of recreate them in, some more caring way in which academic freedom is enshrined, then we need to do it ourselves. And this relates to the question of who is interested in this. And, the point I made earlier about people who are kind of, shutting their eyes to this, academic freedom, I don't think it's divisible. You can't have partial academic freedom. If my academic freedom is being undermined, then everybody is, because Deborah might want to start doing research in this area, or anybody might.
And as you said, the fact that there is no external authority to appeal to suggests that the only option is to get our house in order within our own governing institutions and within. You've got the global boycott, which is really an impressive, if not tragic that it had to come that far, but that's still ongoing, if I'm not mistaken. So there's pressure on the institution to change course, but when the institution is more or less captured by these folks who are kind of doubling down on past mistakes and then coming up with excuses for why they made a decision, and there's it makes it very difficult to untangle that kind of course of action once it's gone down, without just getting rid of the existing management. But it's much easier for them to get rid of the critics of the management than to get rid of themselves. I mean, so yeah. I guess it's something to think about what we can do as academics, both within the UCU and also perhaps even beyond that, to think about actually preserving academic freedom in a context where this can happen.
Elect vice chancellors. I don't think I'm wrong. It should be an honour, and you should serve for maybe 3 years or a term, and then someone else does it and you go back to your research or whatever. don't think that's controversial, but I think it's something to think about.
Well, they do it in Europe.
No, I agree. All staff need to have a much greater say in how universities are organised. I don't have any magic beans for making that into a reality of actually happening, but the lack of real commitment and investment of some of the people making these decisions into the institution is also a huge part of the problem. So a number of the individuals that were key in making these decisions have already left Leicester for jobs elsewhere. Whereas the decades of commitment and investment to our university that some of the people who they fired, by contrast. And so it's just, it's one part of a very problematic picture, just in the way that the hierarchies of higher ed institutions.
Well, yeah, and because so much has now shifted up to this kind of executive search, and these people are kind of trading jobs for one another to get the equivalent of CEO salary inflation happening, where they kind of change from place to place. But then the only thing that they need to promise is that they change something. But changing something for the worse is a change. So they can come in and smash things up and then say that they've saved some money and then move on. And someone else has to then deal with the fallout from that, including especially the academics. And, I don't think, would any of us say, under no circumstances could you ever stop teaching and researching a subfield, like, say, not necessarily critical management study, but let's say people didn't want to do archaeology anymore, like is currently the case because the government has cut funding for archaeology, or maybe they returned it, but either way,
they did return it
at Sheffield, but they're getting rid of these things because there's not funding. But I feel like academics would want to do that in a kind of on the basis of something in the curriculum, on the basis of the students and the staff, to think about, okay, well, where's knowledge going that this makes sense? So let's say even if you wanted to get rid of critical management studies because it was no longer of interest, to think through, well, why would we do that and how would we do that? As opposed to this kind of, we could just drop entire segments of knowledge from the course catalog, just seems to me to be only something that people who have no sense of what knowledge is can actually make that level of a kind of vandalism.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the universities are being run by vandals. They're either potential vandals or, they are actual vandals. And I don't think there's a vice chancellor in the country who would not do the same if they needed to and if they could get away with it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And here's someone noting that this is managerial freedom rather than academic freedom, and the managers won, which is a really interesting way of thinking about it, and probably something to think about. As we've done on our show for the past year or so, I think Joe caught that we might have been doing this a year now, which is massive.
Yeah, I mean, time has obviously lost all meaning, hasn't it? But
sure.
It was when you challenged Matt Goodwin to talk to you about stuff, and he didn't.
Yeah, still waiting.
I think it might have been a year now.
Yeah.
So
most of our activity has been challenging some of these kind of phony panics over academic freedom. But this is a real, and it's been going on for quite a while, and it sounds like it's going to continue. And really just thank you both for, letting us know, and hopefully we could get the word out to a wider base that this is something that we should all rally to stop this from happening, both to you, but also to, we can't really let this precedent stand, I don't think.
It's not just Leicester, it's not just management studies, it's not just medieval studies. And that should be of concern to us all.
I think Sorry.
No.
I just want to add, I think that the point was that I can't remember the author, but that this was around managerial freedom, you know, and this was obviously the, you know, the big thing. And again, in the 80s with that, you know, managers' right to manage. I think that point was very astute, that it was more about managerial freedom than academic freedom. The other thing to remember, because we didn't talk about it at all today, but we should remember it, you know, the dispute at Leicester was a really big thing, you know, because so many of us lost our jobs, and, you know, it was good that people paid attention. But this same thing happens day after day after day in British universities. Anyone on a short-term contract, their contract comes to an end and it's bye-bye. And then they, you know, they potentially lose their livelihood. They lose the freedom, maybe library access and all of the rest. They lose their ability to do their research. So, and, you know, that's just normal. That has become normal, and it shouldn't be normal. It's wrong. That is,
it's been my life for 6 years.
On academic freedom as what happened to us.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, and this drawing to attention the way that this is an individual tragedy, and a real kind of, I can only imagine the kind of anxiety and stress for folks with losing your livelihood in that way as individuals, and that's all the more reason to collectivize through the union and to kind of push back in that way. But if you think of knowledge as not just an individual property that you're buying and selling, but something that as a university, you know, globally, we're all trying to forward knowledge in some way, preserve it, extend it, revise it, whatever, to just have that whole sections of that just cut off for no good reason is a real tragedy as well, and could really disrupt our capacity to deal with problems that we have. You know, like maybe we could use some critical management studies to fix university management, for example, right?
Maybe that's what they're scared of, isn't it? That's exactly what they're scared of.
Yeah.
But climate change or whatever else, you know?
Yeah.
And as David's absolutely right, that the same thing is happening with casualization. So we tend to make that an economic argument and say, you know, we need open-ended contracts, but it's a real risk that we're putting to the kind of reproduction of knowledge and extending that to new generations if the younger generations are constantly precarious in that
and they're but it's I suffer from casualization, but the students I taught last year at Manchester suffer too, because they can't get me for references. There's Manchester, you lose that institutional knowledge, they lose loyalty. It harms everybody. And as David says, academic freedom, the ability to produce good quality research, you know, without the pressures and strains of worrying about the next application and worrying about the next job and where you're going to live and the rest of it. It's just lucky that I didn't want to start a family, if I'm honest, because, you know, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing.
And for what, you know, like they end up hiring someone else on a fixed term cash the next year.
I don't know what more Manchester University could have done to put people off applying to them actually last year, and they still over recruited, and I still would have been kept on had I not got this job on this other project. I don't know what these people, I do not know what these big RGs need to do to put people off. So ultimately the work is there, and it has a detrimental effect on our open-ended staff as well, because they are just burdened with so much admin.
And as your case at Leicester shows, you know, what is job security at a certain point as well? If you think you have security, well, they'll just get rid of the whole department. But so thank you both for bringing this to our attention. I genuinely hope. I guess what's the status? I mean, there's still appeals ongoing, and are you doing this now for principle, or are you still hoping to return triumphant?
We're in the process of it's quite a slow process, but we're taking University of Leicester to employment tribunal. That's the kind of we're kind of going through that process for
Right.
unlawful dismissal.
Well,
for those of us who do remain employed at the university, we have been promised that there will be no further mass redundancies until January 2023.
wow, you get
Wow,
a whole
well,
13 months or
a
whatever.
whole year.
I know, isn't it? Shouldn't we all just feel so secure?
Wow.
How
Grateful,
lovely of them.
grateful. I hope you're feeling grateful, Deborah. Really,
Oh, of course.
for that.
I love it. I'm very thankful.
What do they give Scrooge at the end of the Christmas Carol? Like thank you so much for topping us or whatever. But yeah, so, well, I wish you all the best of luck with that. And anyone who's listening who can, get involved, I think this is a kind of a Waterloo type of moment that we need to really stand firm on this on behalf for everyone's sake. So thank you for being on the front line of that really terrible situation. And I'm sorry that you have to go through it.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on. Thanks for not cancelling us. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And if you talk to Michelle, let her know.
Thanks for platforming yourselves today, guys. It's been lovely to chat.
Absolutely.
And good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
All right. Bye.
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 What Carol doing, does it? You know what? You can't say what he thinks, is that why?
Free speech.